Welcome to all of you, and welcome to our two ambassadors here this morning. Welcome to CSIS. My name is Michael Matera. This is day 5 for me as the new director of the Americas program at CSIS. And I'm really happy to be a part of this great institution and really excited about the challenge of putting together over these next weeks and months a new and robust Americas program at CSIS. I see a lot of familiar faces here this morning, and I look forward to getting to know more of you over these next months and hopefully years. This is my first program at CSIS, and I think we have a really good program for you this morning. Ambassador Martín Lousteau and Ambassador Noah Mamet are two very talented individuals with a distinguished career of service as political actors in their respective countries. I'm not going to go into the details of their biographies because you've got them in writing, but suffice it to say they're serving at a very special time in the bilateral relationship. We've just come through 10 years of challenging times, is perhaps the best way to say it, challenging times in the bilateral relationship. And over these last months, our two governments, two countries have been launching really a new phase in the relationship, crowned by the visit of President Obama to Buenos Aires at the end of March, and the visit of President Macri to Washington a week later for the Global Nuclear Summit. We saw the chemistry that there was between the two presidents, in the pictures from the visits, and I think it's fair to say that there's the same chemistry between the two of you, between the two ambassadors, and that's why I thought it would be a great idea to get them together. Noah is up here for meetings this week, and they both agreed to join me here at CSIS for this first program. So thank you all very much for doing that. The way we're going to work it this morning, I'm going to turn the floor over to the ambassadors. Each will have 10 or 12 minutes for some comments on these last few months, on the visits, perhaps on yesterday's decision by the appeals court in New York that takes Argentina one step closer to ending the default and reinserting itself in the world. After their remarks, I'm going to make a few questions myself to them, and then we're going to open the floor for all of you. And I've also told them if they have questions for each other, we really would like to have this as a conversation. So without further ado, Noah.
Mike, thank you very much. Congratulations, by the way, on the new gig here. Mike is a true expert, as many of you know, on Argentina. Was at the embassy there and is really beloved throughout the country, all the hard work that you did at the embassy. So thank you for the invitation. And my friend Martín Lousteau, the great new ambassador from Argentina. Many of you also know. I see my friends from Argentina here. And I kid him a little bit because the first time I became aware of him, I read an article in Time magazine, I think, and the headline was "Rock Star Economist." And I said, okay, well, I'm preparing to go to Argentina. And he was thinking about running for mayor of Buenos Aires. And the description was, incredibly bright, gifted economist with cool hair, married to a movie star actress, and has 1 million Twitter followers. I said, I got to get to meet this guy. And so I think we could talk a lot about President Macri and the talent that he's brought into this administration. It's amazing in the last year, the change we've seen, but really the last 4 months, as many of you have followed this closely, I'm sure. It was dramatic. And when I first got there, and a lot of folks were very pessimistic, I was actually pretty optimistic. After a couple months being there, I could really feel the change was coming. And I'd done lots of political campaigns in the United States, and sometimes, talking to enough people and traveling around the country, which I did most of last year in I think 11 or 12 provinces, there was a real sense that the country was going to go through a big positive change. So I was always optimistic. But even me, very optimistic, I don't think I could envision how fast the change has happened, how quickly these reforms have taken place. I mean, you mentioned the holdouts. Just take one example. It's been an ongoing issue for almost 15 years, and in part because of yesterday's ruling, but really in part because President Macri decided to take this head on at the very beginning of the administration, deal with the bond holdouts, and get it behind them so they can move forward. It's something that's definitely been hanging over the head of Argentina now for over a decade. But I'll just take a step back for a second. when I first got there, we were really trying to focus on several key topics: science, technology, energy, and educational exchanges. Partly because we didn't have a government that was super cooperative on a lot of things, and there was tension, and it was challenging. And we figured, okay, well, those are 4 topics that we could probably still make progress on, even without a partner. And because we're in Argentina, everybody jokes you need 2 to tango, and we really didn't have a partner. And so these were good 4 issues for us to move forward on. Now we're in a different world, and it really is, I think, a great opportunity for us to find those areas of mutual self-interest and work on them together. And that's what you saw happen when President Obama came to visit just a couple weeks ago. I think people were surprised how quickly also he came down to show support for this new direction, big directional change. And so you mentioned the chemistry was real between the presidents and the first ladies. They really hit it off. And we signed 4 agreements. There were 2 on security, 1 on increasing travel and tourism between both countries. I think is really important, and we could talk about that. And you know, in the TIFA, we also signed a trade investment framework agreement. And so, you know, 4 different areas that I think are really important. Argentina also dropped the fee for Americans to travel to Argentina, which I think is going to dramatically help and boost increased tourism to Argentina, which will help their economy. And we're limiting the number of Argentines who have to come into the embassy to get an interview. So we call it an interview waiver program. So we're both trying to lower the barriers for travel and tourism. We have over 500 American companies that do business in Argentina, and many have been there for 100 years, literally. I see our good friend Craig and the oil and gas companies there, but also like Ford Motor Company and Citi and Cargill and GE. These are all companies that have been there 100 years. And so we have a long history of working together with Argentina. And so Martín and I are working on a couple issues that have been stuck for a long time. Lemons and beef, as you know well, are issues that have just been the thorn in the side of policymakers for a while.
Please.
We're working on it. And so I think it is a new day, and we're not going to agree on everything. No 2 countries do, but we have a really good dialogue, a very constructive partner, cooperative, and we're, again, focused on the areas that we agree on. It's in our mutual self-interest, and try to move forward. So it's a really exciting time. I was with President Obama, and in fact, I was riding with them to Casa Rosada, and it was really striking. There were tens of thousands of people on the streets cheering, and everybody had their cell phones and wanted to take photos. You know, and he looked over and he said to me, he said, "Did you expect this?" And I said, "Well, Mr. President, I know you're popular, but Argentina's tricky. You know, I didn't expect it to be 10 people deep, all cheering you." I said, so that's a really good sign. So the trip got off on the right foot. And I think we're going to see a lot more agreements, but also just a lot more dialogue. And the last thing I would say, you know, on these big global issues, we need countries like Argentina, big democracies, to work with us. So on climate change or counterterrorism, counter-narcotics, you know, financial stability, these are all issues we need big democracies, especially in our region. And so on this trip, when President Obama goes to Cuba and then goes to Argentina, I don't think a couple years ago many people would say that was a realistic trip. So I think we are in a new age. It's very positive. President Macri has described the relationship as intelligent, and Susana Malcorra, who's the foreign minister, who's absolutely terrific, she says it's a mature relationship. Again, underscoring the fact that we're not going to agree on everything, but there's a whole bunch we do agree on, and we want to work together. And the last thing I would say is, all the time I go around the country and I say, we, the United States, not only do we want a strong Argentina, but we need a strong Argentina for the reasons I just discussed. And it's good not just for Argentina, it's good for the United States, it's good for the region, and I think it's good for the world. So with that,
great.
Ambassador Lousteau, you can have the floor.
Thanks, Noah. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks to CSIS for hosting this event. And it's hard to say anything after Noah, and particularly with Mike here, because they know Argentina maybe better than I do. So, and Noah has been not only a great ambassador of the US to Argentina, but also the deep understanding. I think that's because of your political sensitivity that you have on the complexity of the country and the way you convey it. It's actually a great asset to the bilateral relationship. As you mentioned, a lot has happened in the last 120 days. We measure in days because it's really short time. We're saying 4 months is nothing. 120 days sometimes sounds like a lot more. Argentina was on the brink of a crisis and really changed course dramatically, and we're now sailing ahead. Actually, avoiding a crisis has some positive things and sometimes implies some challenges. Within the positive things, one of the most important one is that Argentina had a lot of crises in the past, and crises are a huge source of wealth redistribution, a very unfair wealth redistribution. The history of the deterioration of social tissue in Argentina and the increasing inequalities tied to financial crisis. So we are very happy that we avoided one. The other bad thing about crisis is that when crisis hit, the usual consequence to that is that you break rules and you enter in discretionary mode. So to avoid crisis is extremely important. What is a challenging part of that? It's many times you have more political room for maneuvering when the effects of the crisis have been felt, because that provides you with more authority and more political strength, and this is more challenging. I'm happy that is a challenge because, as I said, crises in Argentina have been extremely costly for all of us, particularly the last one. The figures of the depression in Argentina in 98 till 2002 are strikingly similar to the Great Depression in the US. So now the new administration has really delivered on the promises made by President Macri during the campaign, even though some of those promises were not populist at all. They were actually hard things to convey. I'll mention some. You all know what they are, but normalization of the exchange rate. That implies a devaluation, and devaluation always has costs. The lowering of trade barriers, reallowing for profit remittances, increase in tariffs that puts an end to the snowball of subsidies that was taking place in Argentina, affecting fiscal balance or increasing the deficit in the public sector. And finally, of course, negotiating with the holdouts. All these things have done with extreme dexterity. It was hard to expect that some of these issues were going to solve in such a smooth and fast way. Normalization of the exchange rate and the negotiation with the holdouts are two of the most extreme examples. I think that is related to something that is sometimes overlooked. The other day we were stressing this with NOAA. That is, the president has been able to call into the government very capable ministers and secretaries, really, with an amazing CV. It's common in the US that people go into the public sector and out of the public sector, and they go back to the private sector. That's not the case in Argentina. Having mentioned this, I always say that being in government is different from being in a company, because you have 40 million shareholders. So your fellow members of the cabinet are shareholders, the media are shareholders, the opposition are shareholders, the unions are shareholders, population at large are shareholders. So it's a different technical set of capabilities, different set of technical capabilities that you need. But for sure, you need people that understand the world, they understand the consequences of their actions, they understand the mindset of the people they interact with, and they can provide for rules that are not only sustainable, but actually transparent. And that is extremely important in a country that has been losing productivity in the public sector, productivity of its public expenditures. So all the things we were able to do these things because of the human quality that was moved into government. And I'll add another bit to that, particularly when we look at the holdout issue, which is population in Argentina are demanding for rational behavior. For example, the 3 bills related to the holdout resolution were passed in Congress in 3 weeks, with almost 2/3 of the votes in each of the chambers, even though the administration has a minority in both. And this is because the population is punishing free riding, and it's actually demanding that some rationality and cooperation takes place after difficult years. And I think this is very good news. So yesterday we have also very good news, and the court ratified the judge's decision that allows Argentina for the issuance of bonds to repay bondholders, to pay bondholders. This is, you know, that the due date for paying is tomorrow. It's today. Today. So that is the kind of stress test that Argentina was put into. Yeah? So 3 weeks for approving the bills, then the audience at the Court of Appeals, and 1 day to pay. So when we're talking about 120 days with this kind of calendar, or a very demanding calendar, I think it's quite remarkable what has been achieved. The important thing about the resolution of the holdout issue is that it puts the last piece to the normalizing agenda, and I think that from now on Argentina can move into a more positive agenda, and this is good not only for the region and the world and the bilateral relationship, but it's also very, very important for Argentinians, very crucial for Argentinians. Of course, all this that happened in the last 120 days happened in a region that needs and craves for Argentina to retake its traditional role. It's a region that is facing challenges now, and it's very important Argentina can do what it many times in history has been doing within the region. And of course, all these measures, the domestic measures, but also the stances that Argentina has been showing in the Latin American scenario, trigger renewed interest by the world. We were really honored to have President Obama in Argentina. Mike and Noah talk about the incredible chemistry and the agreements reached. On top of that, there was of the 4 agreements reached, there is a bigger umbrella that is a higher level political dialogue, because there were many agreements or many mechanisms for interaction between both countries that went into hibernation in the last years. So it's very good to have an umbrella in which to relaunch all of them. And there were also some other signals besides the visit of President Obama. We are having visits of Argentinian officials almost every week at the embassy, and I'm sure the same is happening. So it's a very intense re-engagement that we are witnessing, and I would say there were other signals of that happening with the rest of the world. We had the visit of Prime Minister Renzi, visit of President Hollande. President Macri was here. While he was here, he invited personally Prime Minister Abe to come to Argentina. Yesterday, President Putin invited President Macri. There was a talk about the vice president is going to China. So really Argentina is eager to re-engage with the world, and it's showing that. And not only this is important, again, for the region and Argentina and the world, it's very important for Argentinians. I think that all this paves the way for a better future for Argentinians. Yesterday we had a meeting organized by the Department of Commerce regarding trade winds in Latin America, and I had the opportunity to listen to some of my colleagues. Some of them could show a consistent track on economic policies, and that was not the case in Argentina recently. In the last decades, I would think. The whole region benefited from commodities and capital flows and trade. Argentina only benefited from the booming commodity prices. We had capital outflows while the rest of the region was having capital inflows. And actually, for example, the trade with the US has been stagnant for the last 10 years, which is an incredible figure. Well, all the rest of the world was increasing trade, particularly many of the countries in the region. This is striking for a country that's the 3rd largest country in Latin America. It provides for a very interesting market, and together with Mercosur, a huge market, which has plenty of opportunities. Sometimes, I was hearing yesterday at my colleagues, and I said, we all missed this in Argentina. We couldn't do this. But the other side of the coin, that we have a great upside, great potential. So I remember 2 years ago, we were here with a delegation of representatives, Congress representatives, and I was having a chat with Fede Sturzenegger, the president of Central Bank, and he said, Argentina is a cork being pulled down underwater. The sooner we release it, it's going to be floating very, very easily. And I think that is something that we're witnessing. Argentina has lots of opportunities. Agro-industry is something that will always say, but for example, the potential in trade in agro-industrial sector with the U.S. is striking. It's like the U.S. imports 150 billion a year of agro-industrial products, and Argentina participates with less than 1%. The same happens with industry. There are, many of the U.S. is the largest provider of DI in Argentina. Most of the U.S. companies in Argentina, they're doing very sophisticated things. Very sophisticated things. We have opportunities in tourism, of course. That's something that Noah is all the time talking about. And entrepreneurship and technology. Argentina has 4 unicorns. Argentinians have developed 4 unicorns in the last 15 to 20 years. It's companies that started from scratch. Now that they are public companies, public listed companies, and they are worth more than 1 billion. Argentina has a tradition in science and technology. We have nuclear technology. Actually, Argentinian companies, public companies, have been awarded a prize in the Nuclear Security Summit for developing technologies that are now available to the rest of the world. We produce satellites. We have biotechnology. We have a large pharmaceutical industry. There are opportunities in infrastructure. That's ports, roads, railroads, airports. We have opportunities in energy and mining. Noah is a big fan of getting both countries to work a lot more together in renewable energies, where Argentina has amazing conditions and the U.S. has the technology and the know-how. And we're certainly doing so. And education and science. And I think that nobody understood this potential better than a few people in Argentina and Noah.
You're giving me too much credit.
No, but it's true, it's true. And I think that was the case because, when sometimes it's more difficult and also easier to look at the country objectively when you come from abroad.
Sure.
It's more difficult if you don't want to engage and understand. But it's easier if you want to engage and understand because you can measure many things objectively. And Noah did that, so he was an optimist when many people, particularly Argentinians, were, overwhelmed by the present, and it was difficult to look into the future. So I don't think I'm being exaggerating. I think that you did a great job for both countries. And in all these things that I mentioned, there is a lot of complementarity. This is what actually is striking when Argentinians comes to the U.S., they see a society that's very similar to ours, very similar. Some tastes are different, organization methods are different, but the basic tissue is very close. And the same happens to Americans traveling to Argentina. If they've never been there, they're surprised. And even in spaces in which we think we compete, given the approach to world markets, we actually can do that together, opening markets, for example, for food and food-related products. So there's lots of works to do together. So it's only been 120 days, but I think that we can say that Argentina is back in the world, is fully committed to a region that, again, as I said, faces difficult challenges. And it's really open for business. And copying what Noah does in Argentina, consider the embassy's doors will always be open. And consider the embassy and myself kind of a teletransportation gate to Buenos Aires and the federal government and the provinces and their governments. Thank you very much.
Martin, that's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for those comments. No, it really is. The sense of optimism is something that, as someone who lived in Argentina for 13 of the last 15 years, I'm not used to. I'm just not used to. We were always facing the challenges that I mentioned earlier. And as someone who married into Argentina 20 years ago, my wife is back in the audience. I feel a very special link to the country, and I'm very excited to be witnessing what's going on. And from here at CSIS, whatever we can do to contribute to a closer relationship between our two governments and peoples, we're ready to help. I think we today have a group of 16 Argentine students. Did the students show up this morning? Moises, no? But, okay.
Students don't like the mornings.
They don't like the mornings, okay. No, but no, as I said, I mean, I really have had many years of the difficult side of the relationship. And for me, Joe Tolchin, I don't know if you all know, he's probably the academic expert who knows more about Argentina on this side. He's at the Wilson Center. I'd like to read one sentence from one of his publications a few years ago. Relations between Argentina and the United States have often been distant, marred by misunderstanding, flawed communication, long periods of tensions, economic competition, and political rivalry. I think that says it all. And other than the 10 years of the Menem administration in the 90s, that really does describe what we've been dealing with. How do we avoid falling back into that again? How do we avoid that? What are you all going to do as ambassadors?
Well, one of the things I didn't mention, but I wanted to highlight, Martín talked about the re-engaging with the world, and I think the first thing that President Macri did, he went to Davos, and not only did he go to Davos for the first time, I think 10 years at least, an Argentine president had gone there, but he brought one of the opposition figures, Sergio Massa. And when Vice President Biden met with him, they had a great meeting. He said, wow, this is an opposition party figure you brought with you. He said, you know, we in the United States could really learn from you. He says, we don't do this here in the United States. And that's one of the lessons I think that we can learn from. He has done that repeatedly over the last 120 days. Governor Urtubey, and many of you know well, and someone from Salta is right here right now. He goes with him.
I'm another example.
And you're another, I'm getting to you, hold on. He's also a different political party. And so Governor Urtubey and Macri have unveiled solar panel farms. Martín ran and almost won. The mayor of Buenos Aires lost by a hair. I have a feeling in the future that may change. But the point is President Macri is reaching out across all the different political aisles, bringing in the best talent, including from the private sector, and he's put a great team together. And I think Mike, to your question, the pendulum, where it's going to, if it ever swings back, and you know, in politics it swings, but look at who the opposition figures are, you know, of other political parties, whether it's Martín or Urtubey or Massa. I mean, they're all up here a lot. They believe in engaging with the world. They believe in trade. I mean, everybody has different opinions, of course, but in terms of the spectrum is a lot smaller than maybe it used to be. So in terms of long term, it's not just, you know, President Obama and President Macri, but it's about the two countries working together. And I think you see the next generation being very practical. And I joke that in Argentina, they like isms, a lot of isms. But I think being practical now is the future.
I'll add to that a couple of things. I always define populism as the subordination of long term to short term. And sometimes when you have crisis, what you see is emergence of political figures out of that crisis, and they become very strong. And they even affect not only domestic policy, and they are discretionary in domestic policy, but they imprint the foreign policy with their own personality. I think that when Argentina avoids crisis, when Argentina builds on moving out of populism and with a longer-term view, that it's better to be, it's easier to have a more stable foreign policy. A foreign policy in which we won't always agree and we won't always have perfect harmony. We won't have perfect harmony. You know, we'll have disagreements, but it has to be a mature relationship in order to deal with the differences. And the openness of the dialogue and the frankness of the dialogue is extremely important, because sometimes for the sake of short term in international relations, both countries, we make really big, long-term mistakes. For example, I think that the sourness of the relationship in the last 12 years is related to the approach that in the bilateral relationship took place during the Argentinian crisis. because the 90s were very costly to the region. They were more costly to Argentina than to anyone, because we had that depression, and 54% of the population under poverty, 1 out of 4 workers out of work, 20 people being killed in December 2001, 5 presidents in a week. So it's a really, really big crisis, the biggest crisis that we had in modern times. And I think that the cost that Argentina bear alone at those times made that for Argentina to move to a side that was unnatural given its history. And this sometimes the U.S. is very, very big, has global interests. Sometimes it deals with, of course, there's priorities in relationships in different places in relationship to the world, and it prioritizes according to also to domestic policy and what's happening. And sometimes those decisions in specific areas, they seem minor, and then they have a way of unfolding that is very complicated in the future. So I think that when we talk about, and this is something that we do often with NOAA, and we engage in this way with both administrations, is we try to understand the restrictions, we try to understand the potential consequences, each of the measures that both sides can take, how we engage, how is that viewed by the public, how we can have a step-by-step approach to things that are sensitive. I think that's extremely important.
Can I add one other thing? So ever since I got there, which was 14 months ago, one of our goals was increase connectivity at every level. That was kind of a mantra. Because what I realized when I started looking into the fact that the Kirchners did not have much contact with the United States. When you look at all the other G20 countries, presidents either studied here, lived here, had family here, at least vacationed here. So there was a real disconnect. And one of the things that Martín and I are working on, and I give a lot of credit to President Macri and the education minister, Bullrich, is to increase these educational exchanges. You talked about students earlier. So we started a new program last year at the embassy, and I'm told we're the only U.S. embassy in the world that has created this kind of program, partnering with the private sector, American companies, Argentine companies, to fund students short-term, 6 to 8 weeks at an undergraduate level. I think the earlier the better, so they have some exposure to the United States. They do get credit, and it's part of President Obama's 100,000 strong, but more importantly, I think, is they get exposure to the United States. And I think in the long run, that'll be very helpful. So what was announced by the government, Argentine government, when President Obama was there a couple weeks ago, they're going to fund 1,000 more students and teachers for short-term exchanges to the United States. When you talk about how do we guarantee long-run cooperation, it's through increased exposure, and I think these educational exchanges are going to go a very long way.
Just to mention one example, yesterday I had there were 60 students from high school that they had hosted 60 students from the US at their houses, and now they moved to the US and they're doing exactly the opposite. And they were fascinated by the contrast of cultures, the similarities, and I think that it's really enriching for both societies.
I think what we're hearing here is this very personal engagement and commitment of the two ambassadors, and that's something that, as someone who was in embassy, working in embassies for many years, well, we're very lucky to have the two of you doing that. I would like to hear a little bit more of your ideas of how you're going to insert yourselves, your staff, into this bilateral relationship, into some of the areas that agreements were signed in Buenos Aires a few weeks ago. But I think you both have done, Martín, just in the few months that you've been here, I mean, you've done a spectacular job in representing your government. Can you share some of your sort of inner thoughts on how you're looking to make a difference?
Sure, absolutely. Martín mentioned renewable energy. I'm from California. Los Angeles is my hometown, so I like to talk about what's happening in California. It's amazing on energy. So half of the energy of the city of Los Angeles is going to come from solar and wind in the next 2 or 3 years, half. The whole state of California, half the energy from renewables in the next 8 to 10 years. In Argentina, it's less than 1%. This is a huge opportunity for us to work together. This is one of the reasons I'm bringing a delegation in 3 weeks from Argentina to California, Los Angeles, Silicon Valley, San Francisco, to focus on technology, innovation, and clean energy. This is a great opportunity for U.S. companies to do business there, to bring expertise, what works and what doesn't. And I think the State Department and other agencies, Department of Energy, have real expertise. They've already sent teams of people down there. So we're working really quickly because Argentina has about a 7% fiscal deficit and about an 8 or 9% energy deficit. So if they can figure out just the energy situation, the fiscal deficit goes away. So energy in general is a critical issue, conventional, unconventional, and renewables. It's one area that we're going to work on together.
Great.
Yes, and 2 weeks ago, the Undersecretary for Renewable Energy Scheme was here. So he had not only a presentation explaining the new framework for renewables in Argentina, which is aiming to achieve 8% of the energy production matrix done by renewables in 2018, but 20% in 2025. So, and we had lots of meetings. Some of them were arranged directly by NOAA. Some of them we provided at the embassy. We had very good, productive meetings explaining the framework, which is, again, a rational framework, but someone who drafted the bill, that worked 2 years on the bill, that teaches renewable energy, that has been studied abroad. So this is a kind of framework, very transparent, that we put it together. And then in all of the issues, the job of the embassy is that each section of the embassy first gets in contact with its counterpart in Buenos Aires. Remember, this is a challenge. This is a new government that most of people could not be in government for the last 15 years. It's a new government that jumps in and faces lots of challenges. So actually interconnecting different areas of the government and building, as I said, a teletransportation mode at the embassy for being able to do this fast enough and efficiently enough is extremely important.
Great. Mike, just one other thing on connectivity between the two countries. So in last November at the embassy in Buenos Aires, we called it a Super November for issuing visas. The entire world of all the consulates, U.S. consulates in the world, the number one place to issue visas was Beijing, no surprise. Number 2, Shanghai. Number 3, Buenos Aires. The whole world. Yeah, 36,000 visas. So there is a natural affinity for Argentines to come to the United States. Hopefully not all of them went to Orlando and Disney World. I said there's other play in Miami. I think there is an East Coast bias, which I'm trying to say, there's a West Coast too and a Midwest.
It's not an East Coast bias. We lack a direct flight.
Yeah, I know, we're working on it. We're working, Martín and I are working on that. Make life easier.
Please.
Yeah, so, sorry, Mike.
No, great. No, I love all of this optimism, but at the same time, I think we need to be realistic. I mean, Argentina's economy is not in great shape at this point. Inflation continues at a very high level. I think in April, it's estimated to be 6% on an annual basis. There have been people have been losing jobs. Things are not moving in a good direction at this point. Obviously, the resolution of the holdout issue is going to allow the government to, again, access international credit markets. But how do you all see the risks over these next months? I mean, by this time next year, when the campaign for the midterm elections begin, the Macri administration is going to need to be able to show results. Do you see some risks here over these next months and into the early part of next year?
First, I think that the direction is a good one, but the shape of the road in this part of the road is particularly bumpy. So I think we're heading in the good direction in a part of the road that is in bad shape. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, part of the things that you need to do in order to get the car moving in the right direction, make the road bumpier in the short term. For example, you normalize the exchange rate, the impact of that is higher inflation. And with higher inflation, then you get lower real wages. And with lower real wages, you get a lower level of activity. And the same happens with, you need to deal with fiscal deficit. So when you deal with fiscal deficit, you can print less money and you can get less fuel. You reduce the fueling of the inflationary process. But when you increase tariffs in the short term, you have more inflation and you have less economic activity. And sometimes we tend to overlook how intertwined these things are. And the other thing is that sometimes markets get very anxious I always say, you're all the time looking at the things that you need to tick on the near future. Please keep an eye on what the things that you've already ticked and that you didn't expect to have been solved by now. We are realistic. There's no way that the mess in which the Argentinian economy entered, particularly in the last 5 years, can be solved in 120 days. It's 5 complete years, and I would say even more, of policies that implied lots of structural weaknesses and inconsistencies, and we're not going to be solving them in 6 months or 4 months. So I think that we're all very aware of that. It's important that the population keeps aware of that, and that political system, as Noah mentioned, and as I explained by the example of the holdout bills being passed, is conscious that this is critical.
I think the administration has taken big actions that some are going to be unpopular, but amazingly, Macri won by less than 3 points on the election, and one of the polls recently had him at 62% popularity, even in spite of unifying the exchange rate and reducing subsidies for transportation, electricity, and water. Normally, you would think these would be very unpopular, his numbers would go down, but I think it just goes to show that Argentine public wanted change. Even some who didn't vote for him did want change. It is a bumpy road to start with, no question, but I've been through the Clinton administration when he first got elected, Obama administration when he first got elected, and they did big things early that were unpopular. They both lost Congress, but they won re-election easily. So I think if you are going to do unpopular things or big decisions, do them early, and you hope they pay off in the long run.
Maybe I changed it a bit, but I tell a story. When President Obama, the night of the presidential dinner, I had a driver a driver from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we went to dinner, and then he was taking me back home. And I said, okay, what's your view on all of this? Where are you from? He said, I'm from Hurlingham. This is a place in the suburban area of Buenos Aires. It's the province of Buenos Aires. Who did he vote for? He voted for the Peronist candidate. How do you rate what's happening? He said, this is more or less like I moved into a house that's been occupied by someone before, and everything is in very bad shape. So I know that the water heating system has to be fixed. So we're fixing it, and I'm not having any hot water in the house. And then the bathroom was broke. So I need to fix it. So I'm moving everything out, and I'm very uncomfortable. But we need to fix the things for the house to be more comfortable. And I think that this is a very important job at communicating this and tying the unpopular measures to the popular announcements. So you can see a link between the two things. Okay, we solve this way, this is costly, but then this is what we can do after we solve this.
Well, it certainly can't be denied. President Macri has a very, very talented group of people in the government, and we're confident. We are confident that the reforms are going to go through, and that Argentina is going to make it through. We're certainly rooting for it. Well, with that, I'd like to open the floor to all of you. We have a couple of people with microphones. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Moises Rendon and Jillian Rafferty, who are some of our research associates here helping. We couldn't have done this today without their help. But we have a question up here in the front row. Brandon?
Many thanks. First, my name is Paolo Fonschira. I'm the president of the Global Policy Institute here in Washington, D.C. Thanks to CSIS. Thanks to both of you gentlemen. Thank you for your candor, realism, and optimism, which is usually a difficult thing to mix. But following up on your question, sir, about the economic challenges, which I really think are quite severe. I mean, I see the optimism, I see the opportunities, FDI, promotion, renewable energy, more exchanges, all this is wonderful. But we're now witnessing a global crisis of emerging markets. And the downdraft is powerful. President Macri is doing all these wonderful things, etc. But there's certain things which are really difficult to modify. Your biggest market, Brazil, I don't need to explain to you what's going on there. The commodities crisis, which is led by the slow implosion of China is a factor which will continue to affect commodities exporting countries for many, many years to come. So I applaud the fact that the government is trying to create a much more positive business environment. One of the things that I noted, as an observer, that was quite interesting at the very beginning, first few days of the Macri administration, was to kick everybody out from the statistical agency. Why do I think that's important? Because you want to have at least honest numbers, which I really think is something that sets a better tone. Which, however, leads me to the next question, which is accountability, transparency, corruption, which is really the devil in the details of any meaningful effort to encourage FDI in emerging countries. I speak not from experience in Argentina, where I have never visited, but from other countries. So my question to you is, given all this, and given the huge challenges to relaunch what used to be sort of an export-driven economy in the current market situation and the domestic challenges, what do you see as the new driving sectors? And if you are encouraging FDI, you say, okay, come here to do, the ambassador mentioned renewable energy. What else is top of the list and the sort of the low-hanging fruit, keeping in mind, as has been noted, that, as you said, the direction is good, the road is bumpy, and maybe time is really not on your side, in a sense, because you have to deliver something for the people. So what are the leading sectors that you would encourage for investors and for export-driven or other economic activities? Thank you.
Thanks. Do we get them together or not? Okay. Thanks for the question. I think that and this is an approach that I take everywhere. It's my nature, but I think it's important that we get things straight in the bilateral relationship, is that we are frank about the things that are challenges, because being realistic is the most important part in order to plan ahead. And I think that's also very important in the bilateral relationship, to understand where the difficulties lie. In Argentina, some people say that it's a shame because the governments that come after populist governments, they usually have the bad luck of facing an adverse international scenario. And that's not the case. It's the other way around. It's like populist governments lose after they depleted the very favorable local, domestic, and international scenario, and then they have nothing to hold on to. And then they lose. And then when they lose, of course, you are, by definition, facing difficult times. And I think that this is what happened in Argentina, and that's why I also highlighted that as an Argentinian, I'm really glad that we didn't have a crisis. Crises have been extremely costly in Argentina. In many areas, I actually wrote a book on the cost of crisis, even from the cultural point of view. But of course, they provide for less room to maneuver. Having said this, in the last years, a great part of the boom that the region experienced did not happen in Argentina. Argentina really profited from soybean prices going up. But for example, in the 90s, Argentina and Brazil had more or less the same level of capital inflows, around 3 to 4 percentage points of GDP per year. In the last 5 years, Argentina had capital outflows. FDI in Argentina, which was on top of the list in Latin America during the 90s, we fell below Peru, we fell below Colombia. So actually I think that there is an opportunity in many sectors, because price to earning ratios are different in Argentina. So there are opportunities while the rest of the world it's becoming difficult. Argentina has an upside opportunity. And I see that in many different areas, not only in renewals. From the public sector point of view, I see that in renewals, but I see that in, as I mentioned before, infrastructure in general. So again, ports, railroads, roads, and the Ministry of Transportation is working on each of the bits of this plan in which it makes sense for the private sector to step in. Now they are drafting a bill for PPPs. So I think that there are many opportunities lying there. Then we have to remember, sometimes this is overlooked, because in the bigger bilateral picture, Argentina, or in the bigger global foreign policy of the US, Argentina is not so important. But the US companies, US has always been the largest source of FDI in Argentina, except for the 90s. If you take a list, we have 500 multinationals in Argentina, 200 are the biggest one, half of them are American, half of them. So I see a big opportunity in terms of when you change the rules of the game, and when you change the rules of the game, it may be the case that in the short term, you make less money from the accounting point of view than in the years before this, but your company is going to be worth much more, which is what's been happening in the recent months. And I see the first opportunities, I see the companies that already know Argentina, that they are involved in very complex operations in Argentina to profit from the environment and invest more. You have companies in Argentina, American companies in Argentina, for example, they base the whole world's R&D in Argentina, Clorox. Or they base their accountancy for all the group in the world in Argentina, or the legal department in Argentina. As I see value-added services, I see Argentina as an extreme apt place for value-added services. Why? I mentioned some reasons. Why? One is you already have multinational companies that operate in Argentina. Second one, I don't know why, because it's a mix of cultures or whatever, but Argentinians, maybe I'm the exception, but Argentinians are quite apt at speaking different languages. Third, we have the same time zone of the biggest market, which is the US. Fourth, our native language is the language that's growing the fastest in the world. Fifth, we have many Argentinians, and in the US there are 240,000 Argentinians living. Every day I meet with an Argentinian that's doing something outstanding in the private sector, in the science sector, in the education sector. So for example, in multinationals, you have many Argentinians very up in the ladder. You know, the head of Latin America in JP Morgan, the head of Asian in JP Morgan, you can find them anywhere. They can be good advocates for outsourcing things in Argentina. So I see those opportunities really important. I see real estate, we're having, again, lots of questions and real estate developers approaching Argentina. It's a market that actually, because of the lack of mortgages, because of inflation, there's a market there that it's, remember that, for example, given inflation in Argentina in the last years, only 3% to 4% of the formal labor force was able to get a loan for around $70,000 to buy a house. Only 3%. So I really see that even though the situation is difficult from the regional point of view, the global economy has also some troubles, but Argentina has really been held underwater.
I just add a couple things to that. You mentioned JP Morgan, and our friend Facundo Minuhin, who runs it down there, went up to try to convince Jamie Dimon to open up the service center of Latin America in Buenos Aires. And the story that he says publicly is Jamie Dimon said, this was a year and a half ago, he said, I just read crazy headlines about Argentina. Why would I want to do this there? And it took him an hour, but he convinced them on human talent, that the human talent is very strong there. And so I think economies, when you look at information technology, in Latin America, where I would go to Buenos Aires. I mean, that is where the human talent is. We talked about Globant earlier. There's how many unicorns?
Four. It's Globant, Mercado Libre, OLX, and Despegar.
So you have young, talented, smart people, especially on technology. So you have that whole side of the economy, which I think is going to boom. Technology hasn't yet taken grasp of the economy. Uber started yesterday. For example, in Argentina. There's all of this stuff that is just starting that's been held back on the sidelines. And then, of course, because of the holdout deal, you'll be able to finance the roads and bridges and water treatment plants. None of that has happened in over a decade. So those are going to be good jobs as you're financing construction work around the country. There's still challenges, no question, but I think there are real avenues of growth.
Okay. A question in the back.
Aaron Rosen, Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi. First of all, thank you very much both for your presentations. It's nice to hear some optimism. Like everyone in this room, I'm very happy to see the relationship fostering again. I had a question. 2 days ago, there was a presentation from your Commerce Secretary, Miguel Braun, and he was kind of carrying the same message that Argentina is open for business and that Argentina's back. And I was wondering, looking beyond the US-Argentina relationship, where within the Americas do you see the most renewed interest in Argentina as a market, Where have you seen the most re-engagement, and what is that process looking like? Muchísimas gracias por su trabajo en esa relación.
Within the Americas, you mentioned? Yes. So Secretary Brown, after leaving the US, was traveling to Toronto to start engaging in trade negotiations in Toronto, with Canada. And Argentina is reopening or reinforcing the trade agreements and enhance specific sectors with Mexico. Of course, we have the Mercosur, but Brazil is in the situation it is at the moment. But I see that everywhere. Argentina, the Mercosur is about to submit its proposal to the European Union. I was a witness to the bilateral meeting between President Macri and Donald Tusk. President Macri said, we want to speed this up.
And one thing I'd add just on the US side, so when President Obama was there was a separate conference that AMS, the American Chamber of Commerce, put together. And they announced $3.5 billion of new investments in the next 18 months that was already committed, and up to $18.5 billion over the next 3 years, assuming market conditions continue to move forward in the right direction. Again, in terms of growth, you talk about cattle and beef. Everybody knows, famously Argentine beef is one of the best in the world, if not the best. Martin will correct me. But Paraguay today exports more beef than Argentina. That's what happened to their industry, was decimated. So it's going to take a while to build that back up, but President Macri eliminated all taxes on agriculture on his first day, reduced on soy, and eliminated on mining. And just one more example, I think according to President Macri, there's about 150 mining companies in Chile and only 30 to 40 in Argentina. And what he says is, God didn't put all the minerals on one side of the Andes. And it's, so the business climate wasn't good enough for lots of companies to work there. I think what they're trying to do is change that.
We can group maybe 3 more questions. We're approaching the end, but maybe up here in the front, this gentleman here, and you, well, yeah.
Good morning. My name is Carlos Calcopietro. I came here as a Fulbright exchange student in the 80s, and I have been here now for almost 30 years. I saw you in Buenos Aires in December in the CARI, and I was very excited with your proposal to favor exchange of students. I just, after more than 25 years as a consultant in international development, I rejoined the faculty of American University. I'm a resident fellow now, and I propose to the Fulbright Commission in Buenos Aires to revamp a similar program that we had in the 90s, bringing young political, social, and civil society leaders to the United States to stay a week, a Washington tour, let's say. But we were encouraged by your words in CARI, and we want to announce that similar to what Georgetown University is going to do soon, before the end of the month, we would like to repeat a similar program before the end of the year with students, and focusing, if possible, on students, taking your words, students that could have never come to the United States. So we, in our program, we will try to get not the traditional Fundación Río de la Plata exchanges, because they have a great program now for many years, but we would like to target students in the provinces, in different public universities, that they are not the most evident candidates to come and know the United States. And we are...
Get to your question, please.
Yes, the question is if we can see you in Buenos Aires when you return to propose it and arrange it.
It's easy.
Of course, I will.
Great.
So it's great. The educational exchange program that we created is called Friends of Fulbright, and 55 of them were just here, University of Texas, Alabama, and Mount Holyoke in Massachusetts. They all came back, life-changing experience. They're all from public universities. None of these students have ever been outside the country before this trip, so I think it is a life-changing experience.
So 2 more questions.
Ricardo.
I'm Ricardo Vanella. I'm the founder and creator of the Argentine American Network for Leadership, and thank you very much. Just a little comment about not emotionally, but a rational approach. As Jack Welch said, if you put the right people in the right place at the right time, that is the most important strategic move. When you hear from those guys the level of explanations, I am very proud as an Argentine to see our ambassador handling that English, that speech. That's outstanding and historic for us. So, said that, I would like to propose you, all of you, to repeat this in Argentina, and we could be instrumental for implementing that.
We'll
To
take
take
this on
the
the road.
momentum.
We'll just keep doing this wherever we go.
take the momentum.
He's coming to California. We're going to do this there in California. As soon as Martin comes back, we'll do it in Buenos Aires or anywhere else.
Rolling ambassadors.
Yeah. Ricardo, we'll do it.
Pass the
Good morning. I'll get straight to the point. Marcella Monahan, AM General. We make the Humvee. Could you, Mr. Ambassador, specify, you mentioned 2 security agreements.
Yeah.
Did it include any FMF funding? I asked not from my current company, but twofold as a veteran U.S. Marine, concerned about building capacity for counterterrorism and narco trafficking, and specifically, Mr. Ambassador, because 2 of your senior military personnel just last week approached me asking me for assistance in this for FMF funding.
Sure. Well, on the agreements we signed, most of it was about information sharing, security information sharing, because Argentina very much ultimately wants to get back to visa waiver program, and there's a lot of work we have to do. It is, there's a path to go, and we're going down that path, but a lot of it is around information sharing on security. So that was most of the stuff on the security related, but we recently just had the head of the Air Force was just in Argentina two weeks ago or 10 days ago, and now we have the head of Southern Command coming in a couple weeks. We had the heads of all 4 branches of the Argentine military at the ambassador's residence, along with the Minister of Defense, at the same time, and no one can remember that ever happening before. So again, we're rebuilding these ties. Military to military, we've had a good working relationship over the years. But I will say, on one of the other security agreements that we signed, Argentina committed to more than doubling their peacekeeping force, which is a big deal. That's a perfect area for us to work together on. So we should talk more about FMF, and we should maybe after this exchange information.
I don't know if I have anything to add to that.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have time for 2 more questions? I know we're a little bit over. Are you, Ambassador?
Sure.
Okay. 2 more questions.
Maybe we could ask a couple at a time, and we'll take them.
Yeah, take maybe the 3 here. The woman here in blue.
Hi, Ambassadors. Thank you so much for your time today. My name is Marlena Paparidis. I'm with the National Endowment for Democracy. And my question is perhaps more for Ambassador Lousteau, but either one can comment. So since Macri has assumed office, we've kind of seen a re-engagement towards the commitment to building democratic institutions and supporting democratic actors in the region. President Macri has demonstrated support for imprisoned opposition activists in Venezuela. During his joint press conference with President Obama, upon his return from Cuba, he echoed President Obama's support for democracy in Cuba. So I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about Argentina's re-engagement and commitment to the OAS and democratic actors in the region. Thank you.
And we have 2 questions here behind you.
Thank you. David Lewis with Manchester Trade and working on U.S. natural gas exports. Argentina's been paying premium high prices over the past years, and I'm wondering if you can comment based on yesterday's decision what the government is planning in terms of being able to re-engage commercially competitive purchasing in the future.
And this will be the last question.
My name is Alan Manwaring with Manwaring Associates. Quick question is, what do you see as your political challenges moving forward as opposed to the economic challenges?
Great question. Okay.
All right. Do you want to go ahead? Do you want to start on the democracy human rights?
Yeah. President Macri was very clear on his stance on all those issues, even while campaigning, which could have been controversial and unpopular, particularly given how close the race was. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has exactly the same position. I think that the commitment of Argentina to those values and to the labor of OAS, which is something that Argentina has been very close to historically, is very important. But at the same time, given the sensitive state at which, or the encrucijada, or the crossroads at which the region is, I think that we have to be very careful to strike a balance, again, so that each step that we move forward is not at risk later on. Yeah? So, but I think that the commitment of Argentina to those values and to the labor of OAS has already been expressed repeatedly by the President and the Foreign Minister Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The second question was gas. Yes, Argentina has been paid oil and gas prices, domestic prices above the international prices. It was paying below the international prices when international prices were very high. Now it's kind of subsidizing the industry. I think that for the given the long-term opportunities that those areas have and the current context in the international prices, I think it makes sense. Argentina, again, has the second largest gas shale reserve in the world, and it's a potential source of not only of energy security but also of growth and investment. And the whole regulatory framework, it's been revamped or redrafted in order to provide for more transparent rules in everything, in purchases, also in the regulatory framework for production and exploration. So I think that what you'll see is not only re-engagement, but again, more transparent market rules. And the third one was political challenges. I think that the two things are intertwined, the economic situation and political challenges. I think that the biggest political challenge is, again, gaining or maintaining the support for the direction that the country is moving, even though the roads are bumpy. The second thing related to that is that it's sometimes overlooked that one of the reasons why, not the main, but one of the reasons why President Macri was able to win the election is because the Peronist Party went divided to election. The Peronist Party is divided now. Sometimes you can see it split in more fractions than before. I think that capable administration of the extra administration of this situation is extremely important. And then I think that it's significant that it's a new government, it's starting to understand how things work. There are many ministries, and there are different things that you need to negotiate with these fractions of the Peronist Party, and I think it's very important that you can get a global map or a broad map of all the things that you need to negotiate, so you don't pay excessive prices.
The only thing I would add is when President Obama was there, both presidents talked about the importance of the Democratic Charter and a strong OAS, and President Macri reconfirmed and committed to the Democratic Charter. Obviously, some of the subtext was about Venezuela, but also the importance of the UN and the OAS. So I think there's all these multilateral fora for us to work in. IAEA has always been a place where we work well with Argentina, I think especially now with this government. So a whole bunch of international areas in addition to our bilaterals.
And we have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs who is really knowledgeable about multilateralism. Yeah.
She came from the UN, so she knows these issues.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you for joining us this morning. I'd like to wish you all the best with what is going to be a very, very full agenda. I'm sort of left breathless. I think in 120 days, you all have had more visits, more activity than I did in 12 years at the embassy.
Yeah, that's maybe
so
true.
Best of luck to you. Thank you again, and look forward to having you here again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Thanks, Mike.